Okay, today we are going to make a really fun trifold card using some 12 by 12 designer series paper. And it opens to show the beauty of the designer series paper on the inside of the card and gives you a lot of room in the middle to put a sentiment, to add more stamping, or even more of some of the design from the paper if you want. You can see here that I put a sentiment. And I'm going to show you how to make a card like this. I think that's just the easier way to do it. And the way I'm going to start is I have chosen a piece of 12 by 12 designer series paper. And I'm using one of the pieces from the Hydrangea Haven suite. And I purposely chose this piece because there's a nice kind of subtle design on one side. And then on the other, there's a very vibrant, colorful design. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this side as the inside of my card because I want to kind of mimic the way I did this, where a lot of the color is on the inside of the card and the outside is a little bit more subtle. And I'm going to prepare the paper to do that. 12 by 12, I'm going to cut this so that I will end up with a piece of paper that is 12 inches by 5.5. And I'm going to cut it so that the 5.5 is on the side of the design. Meaning if I look at this piece of paper, you can see that the flowers are growing up. Well, this is the 5.5 inch side here. So I'm just going to take a look and see, okay, my flowers are growing up, which means I want to cut this at 5.5. So think about where you want to cut and make sure that you're cutting on the right side. So I brought that to my 5.5 inch line, and I am going to go ahead and cut that.
Did you hear me?
So I've got the basis for my card, and there's my piece, 12 inches by 5.5. And then I'm going to make 2 score lines. And if I look at the original card, I'm going to flip this over just because it's a little noisy in terms of colors. But I've got 2 score lines on that back piece. They're both at 4 inches. So we're going to do one at 4 inches and the other at 4 inches. And I'm going to bring in my trimmer / scorer. And because I do not want to get mixed up on whether I'm using a cutting blade or a scoring blade, I am taking that cutting blade off. I have been known to accidentally cut when I really want to score, and it's just not a good scenario. So I'm going to bring my paper in, and I am putting that at the 4 inch line, and I am going to score it. And I'm orienting it so that the paper is 5.5 vertical and 12 horizontal. So I've got it at my 4 inch line, and I'm just going to score that paper. And then I am going to turn it 180 degrees. I'm going to put it at my 4 inch line again and score it one more time. And now what I'm ending up with is a 12 by 5.5 that is scored from both ends at 4 inches. And I can go ahead and burnish where I've made those score lines. So I'm just going to grab my bone folder and go ahead and give that a nice burnish. And I'm going to do the other side as well. So I'm just going to come in and burnish that. So if I look at my card base, we've got a very simple trifold card base. This now measures 5.5 by 4 because we started with 12 inches. And essentially we've scored that so we have 3 equal sections. And when I open it up, I am going to see the really pretty pattern on the inside. It's important that you just sort of orient where your card is in terms of what's the top and what's the bottom. And probably the easiest way to do that is just to, if you've got a design on the inside, just open it up and make sure that you know that your design is going in the right orientation. One thing to note, and I'm bringing in a regular A2 size card. This is a regular A2 size card. This is 4.25 by 5.5. And obviously this card is going to be just a little bit narrower in width, but it will have the exact same height as the A2 card. So this will fit really well into an A2 envelope without any issues. So let's talk about the steps we're going to take to finish the card and the steps that I took on the example. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to die cut a shape into the front of the card. And I am using a circle for that die cut. The reason I'm using a circle is you can't really put a circle right side up or upside down. A circle is very forgiving. You can use any shape that you want on this. You could use squares, rectangles, triangles, any kind of shape that you would like to put on the front of this card. I do recommend that when you look at the area that you're going to be cutting, and let me show it to you in this way, that when you have your opening cut, make sure that you have enough room around the front of your card that you'll still be able to put some designs and embellishments. You don't want to cut so much space from the front of your card that you don't have a lot of room around the opening, so that you can still add some design. And what we're going to do is we are literally going to take, in my case, I'm going to take the round circle die cut. I am triple checking to make sure that I have my card right side up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my die cutting all set up so that all I need to do is run this through my die cutting machine. And what I like to do when I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to put the circle is I'm going to fold this all together to get my die situated on my paper. It's easier for me to see if it's centered-ish if the only thing I'm looking at right here is the front of the card. If I have everything open like this, and I try to put that die in the middle, I may get a little distracted by this piece, and I'm not going to be able to see just the front of the card as the front of the card. So if I fold it all together, and I'm just going to eyeball this, and I'm actually sort of kind of putting that in the middle. I'm not going to get crazy if it's not exactly there. And then I'm going to take some washi tape. And this is my next favorite roll of washi tape. The mustaches are not quite gone, but I like these little gumdrops because They're cute. And it's something that I can use just to hold dies in place. And then when I put this onto the plate where I am going to die cut this, obviously, I'm going to take the card and completely flatten it, because this is the only part of the card where I want to put the circle. So I'm going to do this off camera. I'm just going to take my plate. I will leave this here just for something to look at for 2 seconds. But I am just going to take this off camera and I'm going to run that through my die machine and just cut that circle out. All right, so I just ran this through and I'm going to be a little careful when I take this washi tape off. I'm being a little more careful than I am with cardstock because the designer series paper is a little bit more thin. So I'm just pulling that off really carefully. And now I have the hole in the front. And again, whatever shape you want is going to look fabulous. And what's really nice about a card like this is you are going to end up, as we continue making this and using some dies, you're going to end up with some really fun die cuts that don't throw these away. Put them in a container because you're probably going to want to use them on another project. And they come in super handy. This, for example, I think would be absolutely gorgeous with either a really dark, deep black color, maybe a birthday or something, or it would look really cool with vellum over the top and maybe some kind of heat embossing. So don't throw this away. You will find use for it. But now I have my die cut in the front. So that's the first step. The next step is, at least the order that I would suggest that you do this, is that you figure out what sentiment you might want to use on your card. And I have been really enjoying using this stamp set. It's called Happy Thoughts, and it is incredibly useful. It is one that was made by or designed by one of the ladies who's done an awful lot of selling. She reached her $1 million with Stampin' Up! And what's really cool about this is there are some nice sentiments, and then you can combine them. You know, you could say happy birthday, and today is great, everything else in here, or happy birthday, the little things you do so well, blah, blah, blah. They go with everything. And I'm going to use the happy birthday. And then on the inside, I'm using just wanted to send some happy thoughts your way. So for the sentiment, what you're going to want to do is grab a piece of cardstock in the color that you would like. I chose to use white. I just wanted a real contrast to the colors that I'm using. And I also used a Memento black ink. I really just like that crisp color and then the black ink on the top. I think they work really, really well. And I went ahead and I used my Stamparatus and I stamped my sentiment on a piece of white cardstock. So I have everything set up to do some mass production, which the Stamparatus is great for. I've got my happy birthday in here. I stamped that onto white cardstock and black Memento ink. And then what I did is I used the exact same die that I used to cut the circle in the front of my card, and I cut out that happy birthday. So whatever die you used to cut out this hole in the front of your card is the same die that you're going to want to use to cut out your sentiment. And the reason is you want that sentiment to look like, when the card is closed, that it's exactly showing through whatever shape hole you have. And obviously the way to do that is to use the same die. So I went ahead and I cut out my happy birthday with the same die that I used on the front. And then you have a perfect cheat sheet of how you are going to attach the happy birthday to this panel so that it is exactly in the center of that hole. And obviously it's just like a puzzle. Like, here's your puzzle piece and here's the hole for your puzzle. And you are going to fit that puzzle piece right into that hole and adhere that down so that when this opens up, it looks like it's exactly in the middle. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to get a little bit of glue. One thing I do suggest is when you are gluing things onto designer series paper, you may not want to put as thick a glue that you normally do on cardstock. And that's because designer series paper is just a little bit thinner, and you may see the or feel the glue if you put a lot on. What I'm doing here is I'm just trying to get my card vertically straight, and then I'm going to put my sentiment in and get it as straight as I can. And again, I'm not going to get completely crazy, but try to get that as straight as I can and give that a nice little burnish with my finger. And what's going to happen now is when I open that front and I close the front, my sentiment is centered because I put it in from the front. Let's get a little bit more of the die cutting out of the way. There are 2 more pieces that we need to die cut, and then we'll be done with the die cutting for the card. And let's take a look at what those are from the example that I showed. They end up being the exact same piece, and they are this very dark purple. This is gorgeous grape that I used, and it's more of an outline, and it's on the outside and it's on the inside. So obviously there are 2 pieces, one that goes here and one that goes here. The way that I liked to cut the pieces, and let me show you one of them. So this is what I cut that I'm going to use on the card that I'm making right now. I wanted to have something that would be a frame around the hole that I cut, and also a frame around the sentiment. Well, a great way to do that is to use whatever color cardstock you would like, and then to use the die that you use to cut the hole and also your sentiment. So you can see that this is the die that I used for both. But I also need a die that is larger than the die that I used to cut the hole in the sentiment. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to place these dies so that they are concentric. And I'm going to eyeball it to see that when I look around in between the small circle and the large circle, that the area where I can see that cardstock is about the same all the way around. I'm going to take some washi tape and washi tape that down. And then when I put this through my die cutting machine, what is going to happen is I'm actually going to get 2 pieces that are going to be die cut. And this is what those two pieces will look like. There's going to be one circle that is going to be die cut from that die that's in the middle. And then what's happening is that larger die is cutting just a frame around the smaller circle. So I'm going to end up with these two pieces if I put my dies through the die cutting machine like this. This is a really great way to get a frame that will be exactly the size that you need to go around an opening or go around a sentiment. And then you're going to end up with an extra die cut. Don't throw this away. You will find use for it. It's kind of like the piece that we had before with the designer series paper. Don't throw that away. You're going to need 2 of these. So once you've die cut one of them, you can go ahead and die cut another. And at the end of your die cutting for these 2 pieces, you will end up with 2 circles and 2 frames. The circle pieces you can put to the side. You will not need those. But the other pieces are definitely going to go onto the card. And I'm using different colors on the one that I'm making now, but one of them is going to be a frame around the opening on the front. One of them is going to be a frame around the sentiment on that second part of the card. Now, a couple of things to think about when you are attaching the frames. And I am going to do the frame around the sentiment first. So let's just kind of look at where we're going. I know this is obvious, but here's where I want to end up. I want to have that frame adhered right around my sentiment. And one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to put so much adhesive that it is going to gush out, technical term, from underneath the frame. I want to be as careful as I can, but I also want to make sure that that frame gets adhered well. So I'm going to use some Tombow, and I'm not going to put a lot of glue, and I'm not going to put it all the way around, because the frame is going to definitely fit perfectly, because we cut it with the same die that we used to cut the sentiment. So I'm not putting a lot of adhesive. And then I'm going to come in on one of the sides, or the bottom at least here, and just put it down. And I'm going to run my finger around and just kind of eyeball it. And by default, just like a puzzle piece, it is going to fit really nicely around that sentiment. And it gives a nice contrast. Obviously, I purposely picked the green. This is Old Olive, because it pulls out some of the leaves that are in the designer series paper and just kind of pulls it all together. The other frame is going to go on the front. And to do that, I strongly recommend that when you glue the frame on the front, that you literally undo your card base and you lie it flat, so you only have that front that you're dealing with. That way, if you happen to get any glue on the inside, you are not going to be getting it on the sentiment, because the sentiment is nowhere near what you're doing. And again, you're going to take your frame. Don't use a lot of glue. It's going to do the same thing in terms of fitting around that hole. And then when you put it on, you are going to be able to see when it is in my case, around the circle. And I'm sorry if you see my head poking in here. And you can adjust it. You can move it around. You can actually stick your fingers and line it up and get it where you want it to go, and then give it a good push. You can also turn this over, and you should not see any of the color cardstock on the center of that circle. And then you're going to know that it is where it needs to be. And you can see that if I had had my sentiment there, there's a little dab of glue. I would have gotten that all over where I don't want it to be. So now if I fold the card that I have so far, I have a really pretty sentiment that is framed in the old olive. This is kind of a Highland Heather color. Then when I open it up, I have a repeat of that old olive frame, and it's picking up the old olive from the designer series paper. So that's how my sentiment is going to work with the hole in the front. So what else have we got left on this? Well, let's kind of look again at the example card, and we'll talk through the pieces that we have left. We haven't any design on the front, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second. We've also got some bling that is here. There are 3 gems that are on the front. And then we have not yet added the middle section of the card when it is fully opened. I'm going to do that middle section first, and then I'm going to come back and do the bling last. So for that middle section, let's just for 2 seconds think about the size of the middle section. We know that this is 5.5 inches long. We know that each piece is 4 inches. What I wanted to do, and what I did, is a piece of white cardstock, and I cut it just a little bit narrower and just a little bit shorter than 5.5 by 4. I cut this to 5.25 by 3 3/4, and that leaves a nice 1/8 of an inch around in terms of a frame. And like I already said, I used one of the stamps from the Happy Thoughts stamp set. This one, just wanted to send some happy thoughts your way. And I have that set up in my Stamparatus. And I used some Memento ink, and I just stamped on the sentiment that I wanted. Now, you can do anything, obviously, with this piece. You could put more stamps on. You can put more of what we're going to do on the front of the card. And you can do that after. You don't have to do that right now. There are so many things that you can do for your center. But I decided to make it a little simple. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adhere my centerpiece. And again, and I'm sorry to be repetitive, don't put of glue on this if you're using liquid adhesive, because with designer series paper, you may find that you get a little bit of kind of a bump, for lack of a better word, because the designer series paper is a little bit thinner than cardstock. And do your best to get this as straight as you can. It's not as easy when you've got a very busy design to even see where those score lines are. You can see the top and the bottom, but the sides are a little bit hard to see. So don't beat yourself up if it's not completely straight. Now, let's talk about the front. And what I decided to do on the front of the cards was to use some more designer series paper. And I found a piece in the designer series paper collection the one that goes with the hydrangea haven, that had these flowers on it. And to me, these kind of lended themselves to potentials for being fussy cut. So we all know that that means to cut out the pattern. And in this case, I'm not going to pretend that it was the easiest fussy cutting, because there are some small little leaves and things. But there are some of us in this group who like to fussy cut. And it wasn't that painful to do. So what I did is I just, as you can see from me having cut up pieces of this paper, I just took some of the flowers from this piece and I fussy cut them. This is a great thing to do when you're watching TV, although let's be honest, you can't really watch TV when you're fussy cutting because you're paying more attention to the paper. But you can pretend that you're watching, or you can listen. Or if you're sitting out on your back porch enjoying the sun, this is a wonderful thing to do. If you do a lot of fussy cutting, I recommend getting some scissors that don't have really long blades. I tend to be able to maneuver a smaller blade around some really intricate areas much, much easier than if I had a really long blade. And I'm sure you also know that a lot of people suggest that when you are fussy cutting, that you move the paper, not your scissors, in terms of direction. So for example, if I'm fussy cutting these, my scissors are continuing to point directly in front of me, but I am moving the paper. I'm not moving the direction of my scissors. And that way I can control that cut a lot better. And it's much, much easier to do the fussy cutting. Also, when you're doing it periodically, just cut off a piece rather than trying to go all the way around without getting rid of some of the excess. It becomes a lot easier. So I am going to add these little flowers that I have fussy cut to the front of the card. And I wanted to give you a couple of tips on doing this, and I found this out by trial and error. So this is obvious, but whatever you decide, if you decide to put something on the front, when you adhere them to the front of your card, you are going to do your best not to get glue beyond the opening that you've die cut. You don't want to end up gluing the front to the sentiment. It's just not going to open well, and it will cause a mess. So what I did and what I would recommend is when you have figured out what you are going to add and about where you're going to put them, that you kind of visualize where that is. And then I'm going to show you how to put the glue on. But I do want to just pause and think about this for a minute. Obviously, you do not need to use designer series to decorate these. You could die cut some stamps. There's some beautiful stamps that come with the Hydrangea Haven suite, and they will look gorgeous on here. You could stamp them with different colors that go with the designer series paper, die cut them, and put them on here. You could also use stamps that you may not have corresponding dies for, and then grab your scissors and do some fussy cutting of those stamped images. That would be beautiful as well. Many, many ways to do this. But let's now talk about how to adhere these pieces without messing up and without getting glue onto your sentiment. I'm going to start with this one on the bottom left. And I know that that's about where I want it to be. I am going to put the glue here, right where my fingernail is. And I'm going to put a teeny, teeny bit on that frame, but I am not going to go much past the edge of the frame. The reason is when I come back down with this piece and I start messing around and saying, you know, I want to move it a little bit before it sets down, I might move that glue to a place I don't want it to be. So I'm going to keep that glue as far away from the center, but I'm going to make sure that I get glue where it's going to work. So I'm putting my glue right there, and I don't need a lot. That will work just fine. And now if I come back and I have my piece, I can move it around a little bit without fear of getting any of that glue where I don't want it to go. And I think I like it about like that. And that's going to stick down just fine. And in fact, it's kind of fun because it's a little three-dimensional where it's showing that it definitely has some pop. Same thing for the one on the top. I'm going to decide how I want that. And maybe I want it a little bit more. It's kind of cool. So maybe I'll have it like that. So that means that I need some glue right about in here. And again, I'm trying to keep it away from that frame. If I get a little bit on there, that's fine. But I just don't want to get it so much on the frame that I have a potential of getting it where I don't want it to be. And later, if I want to come back and add a little bit more, once I know where that's going to go, I can do that. This piece is a little bit larger than the one that's on the bottom. So I can add a little bit more glue just to get it to stay down. All right, so now we have one last thing to do, and that is to add some final bling. What I used on the original card were some of the wonderful gems, and you can see I like them because I only have one left. But I think what I'm going to do on this final card, the one that I'm just putting together, is I'm going to use some of the blue adhesive bath gems. And you can tell that I like them a lot also because I don't have a lot left. But these will just add a little fun, a little interest. And I'm going to kind of mix it up. And I'm going to put, let's see, I'll put a big, I want this kind of tucked underneath. So I'll put a big one right there. I'm going to put a small gem on my sentiment, and I'm going to make sure that it's visible. And that way when I open, I'll have a fun little gem to see. And then I want one more because I like to work in odd numbers. So let's see, where would that look good? I don't want it to be in a straight line. I kind of want it to be a little bit off center. That's okay. So I'll put that one right there. And there we have it. That is the card that I'll have for today. So here's the front with some really pretty hydrangeas and some really pretty colors, some interest with the bling. Open it up, and this is what I love. It's so colorful, and it just draws you in to that sentiment, and then you want to open it one more time, and then you can see all the beautiful color that you have. Just fun. Before I turn off the recording, I want to show you something to think about. And this gets into what kind of paper, what kind of designs can be used for this kind of card. And really, I don't think there's a limit, but I started looking through some of the more recent designer series papers that I have. And this one in particular caught my eye. And this is going to be the next card like this that I make. And this is from the fine, let's see, the Fine Art Floral. This is one side of this paper, and this is the other side. This is just stunning, absolutely. What I'm going to do with this one, which will be exactly what I just did, is I'm going to cut my paper so that this will be the outside. In other words, it will be the purple. And then on the inside, I'm going to have these flowers, just like I have the hydrangeas. And I have purposely measured this paper so that when I cut it at 5.5 and 5.5, I will have 1 inch of vertical paper left, which means that I'll have enough of the flowers that I can fussy cut them, and I can use that as some of the bling around the hole. So I'm super excited to do that, and I think it will just be yet another pop of color when it gets opened. I cannot imagine seeing a really, beautiful card with happy birthday on something that looks like this, and then opening it up and just that bold, bright color and seeing happy birthday and the sentiment of just wanted to send some happy thoughts your way. I think that's going to be really pretty. So I will make that one as well, and I will post that so you'll have some other ideas of what to use. But think about it. Think about all the designer series paper that you have. For example, there's some really cute ones with dogs and cats. How adorable would that be? Where you could cut out a dog and a cat and put them around the sentiment that you have. For a kid's birthday, there are beautiful papers that have animated clowns or balloons or other things, and they would just be a wonderful, wonderful surprise. Or make your own designer series paper. Get a piece of white 12 by 12 and just have a ball designing and stamping a background, and then use it for this kind of card. So I hope you're inspired. These are really straightforward, they're quick, and they're definitely a wonderful, wonderful way to use up some of your designer series paper.